Very good afternoon, students. Welcome to IIT NEET Foundation or Focus C program of Krishnaveni Talent Schools and Mastermind Schools. So once again, I welcome all the participants for today's session. As you can see on the screen, and you are well aware, my subject is physics. We are in class 8th, our ongoing chapter, friction, is the 4th chapter of the material. And today we are entering into the session number 2. So we started this the last class, that is on Monday. That's Tuesday. And we introduced about the friction. So, friction is one kind of force. Nature's force. Friction is a nature's force which comes into play when two bodies are in contact. Right? Whenever any two bodies, either your foot and surface, or a book and table, or any other two bodies, whether it may be in solid form, liquid form, or gaseous form, no matter. When two bodies in contact, a frictional force comes into play. And this frictional force always opposes the motion of a body, means acts against the motion of the body. When a body is moving in the one direction, the frictional force acts in the other direction. Such a force which makes us to hold the objects, which makes us to walk on the floor, is known as a frictional force. So as it is comes into play when the two bodies are in contact, comes under contact force. Right. So there are three types of frictional force are there. One is static force, second one is kinetic force, and third one is rolling friction. Static friction, dynamic friction, and rolling friction. So based on we are discussed in the last session about all the three types. Once again, recall them before going for what are the advantages and disadvantages of friction. So friction has good effect as well as evil effects also. Sometimes it is very dangerous, sometimes very important. So today we'll discuss about that. But before that, let us recall the what are the types of frictions. This is about the complete friction and the factors influencing the friction. So friction between the two bodies depends on some factors. For example, a simple way. Suppose, so this is a table. You place a book on the table, right? Right? So the weight of the book always acts in downward direction as per the gravitational force, right? Correct? Same time, here, between the contact of the book and table, a table exerts some force, that is upward direction, which is called normal force. So the normal force plays very important role in the friction. Greater the normal force, greater the friction. So friction, either it is a static friction or kinetic friction or a rolling friction. It depends only on normal force exerted by second body over first body. First body exert the weight in downward direction. Second body exert the normal force in the opposite direction. Right? Clear? There is a very important factor which influences the friction. Now when you move forward, we discuss about what are the types of frictions. So you can see here. So whenever, suppose, a very important observation you can make here, there are so many things are there. The first one is static friction. So beyond the static friction, it is called limiting friction. Over the limiting friction, body moves to dynamic friction. Then it is more sliding, and finally it comes to rolling. See, suppose here we place one block of wood on surface, right? This is the wood. We are applying force here. This is the applied force. Force applied. So we know that frictional force acts in downward direction. Friction, F, small f. So whenever you are applying the force here, this applied force is less than frictional force. Try to understand. Applied force is less than frictional force. Body won't move. Body is at rest. Similarly, applied force is equal to frictional force. Also, body is at rest only. But applied force is more than frictional force. Body moving. Body is in motion. Once body starts motion, it starts moving. Means as long as frictional force is more than applied force, the body remains constant. And whenever this applied force reaches the maximum level, peak level, then the force is called limiting friction. The peak level of static friction, the peak level means highest level of static friction is called limiting friction. So once limiting friction overcomes, still more force is increasing, then body comes to the start moving. That is called dynamic friction and start sliding. But in the case of roll, as you have seen yesterday in the video, why the wheels are provided for the suitcase or briefcase to overcome the friction very easily. That is the friction acting between the tires of the wheel or vehicle or a suitcase is called rolling friction. So compared to all, the static friction is more than kinetic friction, which is more than rolling friction. So static frictional force is more when compared to the, means we are reducing. The frictional force reduces when body starts moving or when body starts rolling. But when body is at rest, the frictional force is maximum. And that is called static friction. The peak level of static friction is called limiting friction. So limit, up to limit, after limit, it comes to dynamics or sliding. Right? So this is a very important relation between the three types of frictions. Even though 5 types are there, 3 are the major. The limiting friction and dynamic friction are the part of that. Okay. Right? Then very important role played by normal reaction, I told already. When two bodies are in contact, the first body exerts the weight in downward direction over second body. The second body will exert the equal and opposite direction force called normal reaction. This normal reaction plays very important role in any kind of friction. As the friction is a force, it is measured in Newton. Unit of friction is also Newton because it is a kind of force only. Very important force when two bodies in contact with each other. Okay. So either it is a, see, some more points are given here. Static friction as well as kinetic friction is complicated phenomena, many aspects that are as good as approximation. The force of it obeys the following laws. Right? The frictional force, that is static as well as kinetic, depends upon the nature of two surfaces in contact, whether a smooth surface or rough surface. The force, mainly the frictional force, depends on first kind is nature of surfaces, whether both surfaces are smooth or both are rough or one is smooth or one is rough. Depends on that, the frictional force changes. Because already told yesterday, when surface is smooth, there won't be any much interaction, interlocking, right? But when it is a surface is rough, one body interlock with other body, so frictional force reduces. Smooth surface have more friction when compared to rough surface. You can walk on the floor, smooth floor easily, but oil floor, when you drop some oil and walk it, you will slip because it becomes very smooth, right? So keep that in mind. So the nature of friction depends on surfaces in contact, whether they are smooth surfaces or rough surfaces. Okay. Then the frictional force always acts parallel to the surface of the contact of the two surfaces. Parallel to the contact and its direction of opposite to the motion of the attempted motion. In which direction you are trying to move, opposite to the direction frictional force comes into play, right? So welcome Jogipet. Okay, that is. And next one is the frictional force is independent of area of contact of two surfaces. So frictional force does not depends on area of contact. How much area they are in contact with each other, that is surface contact. It depends only on nature of surfaces, and depends on the normal force mainly, and the magnitude of friction force is directly proportional to the magnitude of frictional force is directly proportional to the perpendicular force, that is normal reaction. That is, frictional force is directly proportional to normal force. What? Normal force. Greater the normal force, greater the frictional force, right? Greater the normal force or greater the frictional force. So whether it is a kinetic friction or static friction or rolling friction, that depends only on the normal force acting on a body. Right? Very, very important factors. One is frictional force depends on nature of surfaces, whether it's smooth or rough. That depends on it, independent of area of contact with the two surfaces, and it depends on the normal force acting on the body. Clear? These are the factors for the friction. Then magnitude. On what factors the strength of the frictions depend, that is limiting friction. So I already told whether it is a limiting friction or dynamic friction or rolling friction. So for example, you can write FL, something they represent FC. So it's directly proportional to normal reaction, no doubt. It's directly proportional to normal reaction. So they can use some to remove the proportionality constant is the constant R or N, right? Or mu, you can write mu, sorry, mu L. Mu is the constant here, that is called coefficient of friction, where mu L is equal to, you can write FL by N. The formula, you can write whatever the symbols they are showing. The limiting friction or kinetic friction or dynamic friction is directly proportional to normal reaction. If it is L, limiting. If it is D, dynamic. It is A, R, rolling. So to remove the proportionality constant, use the constant called mu, either mu L or mu K or mu R. Mu is nothing but coefficient. Coefficient of friction is given by static friction is given by SC road, static. Right? Sorry, SU you can write. Is given by limiting friction, that is, or friction by normal reaction. This is called magnitude of limiting or static friction. Okay. So therefore, coefficient of static friction between two surfaces in contact is equal to the ratio of limiting friction and normal reaction. Right? Limiting friction, normal reaction. So friction or coefficient of friction depend only on the nature of surface in contact. Coefficient of static friction is independent of normal force between two surfaces. Generally, coefficient of static friction is less than 1. Less than 1. Okay? Coefficient of static friction is, you can write Fs is less than 1. Very, very, very important of magnitude of static friction. That is first part, first type of friction. When you move to second, right? Suppose magnitude of kinetic friction, kinetic or dynamic or sliding, whatever it may be, same only. So same like static friction, magnitude of kinetic friction is directly proportional to perpendicular force acting, that is normal. Fk is directly proportional to N. Same. So Fk by N is equal to mu k. Same only. Mu k is the coefficient of kinetic friction. Same is given here. You can see. Okay. Therefore, coefficient of kinetic friction between two surfaces in contact is the ratio of kinetic friction and normal reaction. Since mu k is the ratio, there is no units. Therefore, we require the large force to set the object in motion than the motion of constant velocity. So, angle of friction. The angle with which the resultant limiting friction and normal reaction is called angle of friction. What is the angle of made by the normal reaction with limiting friction? Okay, is called angle of friction. Right? This is a second type, second magnitude of kinetic. Then we can see the magnitude of third one, that is rolling friction. And finally, we can conclude. So rolling friction means the friction between the rollers like wheels and all. So same again. So same here also same Fr by N is equal to mu R. The formula is same. All the types of frictions depends only on nature of surfaces and normal force acting on that, which is the ratio of rolling friction by normal. Here what finally you can conclude is the static friction is more than kinetic friction, which is more than the rolling friction. Rolling friction is very less. When body is rolling, the frictional force acts on it very less. Right? So this is about all the three types of frictions and their magnitudes. Right? So after knowing about magnitudes, we'll see about what is the advantages and disadvantages of friction. So after knowing advantages and disadvantages, we'll go for the how to methods, reducing and increasing the friction also. So before going for this, we'll show you one video on this, on advantages and disadvantages. Then we'll move to the explanation part, right? Just keep watching the video on advantages and disadvantages of friction.
Binny, could you please help me with my luggage?
Sure, sir.
Not that one, Binny. Drag the trolley bag. This one is too big and heavy for you.
I'm a big girl, sir.
Thanks, Binny. Well, in this luggage dragging business, I forgot to welcome you all to Science for Juniors. Hi, I'm scientist Radhikrishnan, SRK, and this is my assistant Binny.
Professor, why is it that wheels make things easier to drag?
You have asked a very profound question, young lady. Let me try and answer it scientifically for you. Let's enter the virtual world. In this module, you will learn about friction, its uses and problems. Can you predict how your palms would feel when you rub them together? Bet you feel heat being generated. Rubbing makes your palms warm. Have you ever thought why? Rubbing of hands produces heat because of a force called friction. Friction is an opposing force that occurs when two surfaces rub against each other. Consider another example. Push a book kept on the table. You will notice that the book slides some distance and stops moving. Similarly, a football rolls when you kick it and stops moving after a while. Why does this happen? In both the cases, there is a force between the objects that comes in contact. This force between the book and the table and between the ball and the ground stops them from moving for a long time. Such a force that always acts against the force of action is called friction or frictional force. So now you know that it was difficult to drag the regular suitcase because of higher friction in comparison to the suitcase with wheels.
But why is it always easier to move things with wheels?
I'm coming to that, Binny. Well, see, friction acts on wheels too, but wheels reduce the surface area of an object in contact with the surface. Wait, open my trolley bag, Binny, and pull out a pair of shoes and roller skates. Now look at this.
Wow, sir! You know how to skate!
Of course, Binny. Now getting to the point, isn't skating much easier and faster than walking?
Sure it is, and it's much cooler too. I also see that it is much faster and easier to move on wheels than by sliding.
Of course it is. Now my body weight, mass, etc. doesn't change whether I wear a shoe or skates. But the friction acting on my skate wheels is much lesser than on my shoe. Did you get it?
Yes, let me also try skating. Ouch!
Well, Binny, skating is not all that cool either. You need to do a delicate balancing act to be able to skate well. Let's now jump into virtual world for more knowledge on friction. Let's now take a look at some of the important properties of friction. First, friction is a contact force and occurs only if the objects are touching each other. Second, friction opposes the direction of motion. That is, it slows down and stops the motion of a moving object. Third, friction produces heat by converting a part of the energy available in the form of kinetic or potential energy to heat energy. Sure, you have heard of the Stone Age people who used to start fire by vigorously rubbing stones. It is often overlooked that friction is important for our daily life. Take a look at this. The boy is able to walk because of the friction between his feet and ground. It provides a grip on the ground that is necessary to avoid slipping or falling. Ever wondered why sneakers always have treads on the bottom? The treads on the side of the sneakers create friction that gives some extra grip when you run and play. Similarly, it is the friction between the wheel and the brakes that helps in controlling the speed of a bicycle and even in stopping it. Here is another example: friction helping in achieving the desired motion. Take the case of a parachute. As air rubs against the inside of a parachute, the force of friction causes it to fall slowly. The greater the air friction, the slower the parachute moves. Check out these examples from our daily lives. The nails that we use to hang different things are held in the wall due to friction between the nail and the wall. Friction is also needed to pick up objects and hold them. In the same way, while climbing a rock, friction between the hands and the rock stops a person from slipping.
It was because of friction that fire was invented.
Right. In fact, even today, matchsticks are lit because of friction. You notice that the surface on which the match lit is rough.
But will that mean that matchstick can be lit by rubbing it against any rough surface?
Of course not, Binny the Mini. Don't be silly. Matchstick can be lit only when rubbed against the rough surface of the matchbox, because friction between the two materials raises the temperature enough for the reaction to take place and hence lit the matchstick.
Got it, sir.
Binny, there is science behind all the day-to-day things we encounter. Just that we haven't discovered many things yet. In fact, I have many more day-to-day examples where friction acts. Just that you wouldn't have thought that friction acts on them too. Take a look. Excess friction makes it difficult to move objects and slows down moving objects. For instance, friction slows down the motion of a bicycle. Even moving a car on an irregular road would be difficult when there is excess friction. What about machines? Do they involve friction? You may be surprised to learn that any object or device that has moving parts can wear out easily due to friction. Many of the machines that we use in daily life would not operate smoothly if they are not protected from the heat and the wear and tear caused by friction. Yes. Now another thing.
Bring it on, sir.
Well, you know grease and oil reduce friction. Try oiling your cycle chain and see how smoothly it works. It will help increase the life of your cycle. Well, let's try this out. Hold this steel glass. Is it easy to hold?
Of course it is.
Now, try holding this. It's just a game. Relax. But did you see that oiled surfaces slip easily?
Sir, I got your point. Now I realize that the same thing happens in machines too. Now I get it.
Great! Then one last surprise now.
But sir, you said this was the last one.
Well, that was just to keep you going. Tell me, Binny, have you ever written with a regular pen on a card?
Holding the pen
Yes,
also.
sir. But
Because of
pens
friction
usually
only.
don't write well on card paper, especially on the birthday cards pasted on the gifts.
Good realization, Binny. Now, why is that?
Don't know, sir. But my guess is friction has something to do with this.
Well, the guess was a good one. As in this case, both the surfaces are smooth. Now, have you wondered as to why it is easier to write on a blackboard with chalk?
Now I know, sir. It's because both the surfaces are rough and the friction is high.
Excellent, Binny. You do make me feel so proud of you sometimes, you see. Well, now that the surprises are over, let's revise what we learned today. The three important properties of friction are: friction is a contact force and occurs only if the objects are touching each other. Friction opposes the direction of motion. Friction produces heat. Friction is useful in providing a grip and preventing from slipping and sliding.
Right. So this one about the total explanation about the friction, right? Now we'll see the next class. We'll see about the video on disadvantages, advantages. But before that, let us have some idea about the what are the advantages and disadvantages of friction, right? Means friction is having the good effects as well as evil effects also. It is very important as well as is having some problems also. You can see there. So when you say advantage of the friction, so advantages, walking is possible due to friction, because without friction we cannot walk on the floor because of that opposition force which is balancing us to walk properly. Two bodies stick together due to friction. If there is no friction, we cannot insert the nail into wall. Brake works on the basis of friction. Just now you have seen the cycle brakes. So without frictional force, we cannot stop the moving object. Writing is not possible without friction. The transfer of motion from one part to another machine is built through by friction only. So when you are seeing the machines in the any companies, so they are connected by the belt. So the movement of the belt is because of the friction. So friction is very important for all our basic needs, right? Then what is the disadvantage here? You can see here. So disadvantage means which is evil effect. So even that also evil effect. So friction is always opposes the relative motion between any two bodies. So it opposes the motion. So we have to apply more and more force to overcome the friction. Therefore, extra energy has to be spent in overcoming the friction. This reduces the efficiency of the machine. Even the friction, when friction comes into play, the efficiency of the machine also reduces. Okay. The friction causes wear and tear. Means it breaks. For example, cycle. When you are using cycle for months and years, because of the friction, the tire will spoil. Or Tire will spoil because friction with the road and tire. We need to replace the tire regularly. Or in machines also, because of the friction, machines will crack or wear and tear. So we need to replace them. Friction causes wear and tear of the parts of the machinery parts. Thus, their lifetime reduces. Friction force results in the production of heat. So producing heat also very dangerous sometimes. Overheat producing. That's why we have to reduce the heat by adding the water. Right? We'll add water to the vehicles to reduce the heat produced by the friction. So these are the disadvantages of the friction. But thing is, we have so many methods to reduce the friction. Wherever frictional force acts more, we can reduce. Or we can increase the friction wherever is required also by making the surface rough. So friction can be reduced or friction can be increased as per our requirement. But overall, friction is having the both side of and two sides of the coin. It's having advantages as well as evil effects also. Right? So sometimes we want to minimize the friction. Any process that makes the two minimize the surface smooth will be reduce the friction. We have to make the surface smooth. So bearings. So what we introduce for reducing the friction? Ball bearings are introduced. Either in cycle or in fan or in machinery, we can find the ball bearings. Why they enter the ball bearings? To reduce the friction. Then lubricants. So lubricants are nothing but oils and grease, right? So lubricants are nothing but oils and grease. Generally in vehicle cycle also we put some oil every time to reduce the friction so that cycle run very smoothly. Similarly, change of oils takes place in vehicles also. So ball bearings and applying the lubricants like oil, grease or graphite, they reduce the friction so that the life of the machine or vehicles increases. Right? These are the methods of reducing the friction. Now when you move next, so between them the friction between the surface and the lubricant must be less. When you are introducing the oil here, so oil will form the layer between the two surfaces so that the friction is reduced. Okay. Then fluid friction. Friction not only exerted by solids, it's also exerted by both liquids and gas also. Both liquids and gases together called fluid. Liquid plus gas. Together called fluids. Even fluids also exerts pressure. Best example, fish, aeroplane, bird. So why they are giving the shape? The shape is called streamlined shape. So because of the shape only, they can swim in the water, they can fly in air. That is because of the shape. It's called streamlined. In science, the common name of the gas and liquid, so fluid. Fluids also exert friction bodies moving through drag. It depends on the nature of the fluid. Right? Shows the object and speed of the object with respect to fluid. So friction minimum for the streamlined shape, which is narrow in front and broader at the back. Nature has given the birds and fish streamlined bodies. The bodies of aeroplanes, missiles, rockets are streamlined to reduce the friction with air resistance. See so nature is given shape for the fish and bird, but we are given the shape for the aeroplane or satellites or rockets. Why you are given that shape? Front portion is very sharp, back portion is very lengthy. So to change the friction, to reduce the friction. So friction is reduced by shape also. That is the reason they streamlined, aeroplanes streamlined artificially, whereas fish and birds are given shape by the nature to reduce the friction. Right? So this is clear about the advantage and disadvantage and reducing the method of reducing friction and fluid friction. Right? So we learned so many things about the friction. What is friction? What are the types of frictions? Magnitude of frictions, right? And disadvantage and advantage of the friction. So with that, we got some clarity about the friction, or more, you can say more clarity about the friction. So These are the questions for today. Before close of the class, write advantages and disadvantages of the friction. That is the good and evil things. Both are is very having both the effects. We have to consider both. If we cannot even neglect the friction, we cannot overcome the friction. Both are important for us, but there are so many methods are there either to reduce or increase the friction. Some cases we need to increase. Suppose surface is very polished. What you have to do to work on that? You have to increase the roughness on surface. Right? So that's all for today. So have a wonderful day. Thank you, students. Thank you very much.